Okay folks, today we're going to be looking at drawing cylindrical objects, particularly focusing on ellipses. So what we have here is a selection of cylindrical objects, and I want you to first of all identify what are the ellipses, where are the ellipses in this particular picture. So these are the ellipses, the red lines, which help to create the illusion of form in a cylindrical object. Okay, so before we start to draw the ellipses, we have to, well, fully understand them. So the ellipse itself, which let's say this is the top of like a can or a cup or whatever it might be, there are two things we need to think about. Well, first of all, the actual roundedness of the ellipse. It is very important that you do not draw it like this, which is quite often the case. People draw the top part and the bottom part, and what you end up with is some weird kind of pointy angle. That an ellipse should never look like that. What we have to think about is that there are two major axes. Well, there's a major axis, which is this line that goes across the middle, which just represents the top section going across your cylindrical object. That will never change. You also have another line that cuts across the back to the front, which is called we'll just name that one, that's the major axis, and this one here is the minor axis going across here, which now in reality, because this object is cylindrical, those two lines, if this were a form, will be the same length. However, we are looking at this as a flat shape, so we have to accept that the minor axis appears to be shorter, which is why it's known as the minor axis. Okay, so what we have to think about is that when we're drawing our ellipses, first of all, that it is a fluid shape, and you will get help with that shortly. But before we do the drawing, we have to mark out to engage how wide the ellipse is and how deep that is the minor axis going across the top. Once we figure those two things out, then we can start to prepare our drawing. Okay, so if you're looking at the top of a cylindrical object and it's eye level with you, it appears like it just looks like a straight line. If you slightly raise your eyes above it, you start to see a very narrow ellipse. As you start to raise your eyes further above it, the ellipse becomes larger. Now, the major axis line across the middle will not get any shorter or longer. It remains the same. But as you raise your head, looking more and more, imagine this is a cup. We're starting to put our head over the top of the cup, till eventually, once we get absolutely over the top of the cup, it will become a perfect circle. Okay, so that's us looking straight into the top of a cup, and as we come back from the side, again, the ellipse gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it becomes tiny and then flat. Okay, so we're going to actually start looking at how we draw the ellipse. So first thing to note is if we try and draw an ellipse with our normal drawing position, or certainly for many of us, will be having our wrist resting on the table. If we try and draw an ellipse, now before we do, let's decide on our 2 points. We want the ellipse, let's say, to be that size. That represents maybe two sides of a cylindrical object, such as a cup. If we put a wrist on the table and try and draw that nice fluid line, we struggle slightly because of the way the wrist moves. However, if we lift the wrist off the table and then rest with our elbow on the table, then what we can do is we can start to get a more fluid shape. Now again, ellipses are always done quite lightly initially. If we want that shape to be even more fluid, if we actually stand up and lift both our wrist and our elbow off the table, we hold our pencil at the end like this, and we very lightly start to create the ellipse. Now what I'm doing here is I'm actually swinging my entire arm, swinging from the shoulder. So the actual arm itself, the elbow's not bending, the wrist is not moving. It's really just coming from the shoulder, this nice fluid movement. And what that does is it gives you a much stronger, more fluid ellipse. Now, most people when they start off drawing their ellipses, so let's say we're saying that this is, well, let's say we're drawing something, just a cylindrical object. We've decided that it's going to be roughly that size, which means we're having one ellipse. In fact, we'll even put this line across to say that those two lines represent what we call the major axis, if you remember before, and we're going to draw our ellipse. We could even decide, let's say at this point, that we're looking at it at a particular angle, therefore what we can see is that the minor axis is roughly that size. Again, it will be, well, in actual fact it's a little bit bigger for the bottom, but I'll explain that after. So we start putting an ellipse in now. It's not uncommon when the ellipse first goes in and it's a bit wobbly, or it's a bit off to the side, or it doesn't quite work. What's important here is that you keep going. Sometimes you end up having to kind of go around, 20 times and then almost picking the ellipse out of the drawing, ensuring again that that there's no corners and such like. Okay, so the important thing here is that when we draw the ellipse, we lift our wrist and our elbow off the table, which may mean having to stand up in order that you get a nice fluid shape that swings from the shoulder, and also that you don't stop after going around once or twice and then complain that you can't do it. You have to keep going until you become comfortable with creating ellipses. You can experiment to see the effect that it has with a few different shapes. So for instance, I might decide, let's say we're doing a candlestick. We almost start off by drawing the thing as if it is completely two-dimensional first. So let's say we'll get, this is a very two-dimensional kind of ornate candlestick shape. Okay, we then start to put ellipses in, again holding the pencil at the top, swinging from the shoulder, thinking about how deep your ellipses are. You put them in all these different sections. Again, it does start off looking quite messy, and only once you kind of work into that will you start to see the form that you're creating with these obviously nice ellipses. Oops. Okay, so you get to see the idea that the form that we're creating starts with. Now, you can, once you actually perfect the ellipse and you start to understand how it works, then you'll find any cylindrical object should be quite easy for you to draw. So, we have got one more thing to consider before I send you off on your task. In fact, before we do, there's one thing worth mentioning. The task that you are going to be given is going to be something along the lines of, well, you're going to be asked to draw a cylindrical object. Many of you may wish to draw the likes of a bottle or a can. So one thing to be aware of is, first of all, let's say we start off with our shape. Let's say this is the shape of a can. We make it absolutely it's almost kind of rectangular to start with. Right, we then put our ellipses on, okay, so there goes our ellipses at those points, making sure all the points are in the correct place. Now let's say we also have writing going across the can, so let's say we've got our can using these nice ellipses. There's that ellipse on the inside of the can. Right, so let's say there is some writing going across the can. Many people, if the writing is going straight across the can, will end up writing it on a straight line. That's not going to work. A straight line around the can is also going to be on an ellipse. So let's say you decide the writing is roughly in a line here. You would put on your ellipses, and then the words would fit along these ellipses. So let's say it was going to just say something like drink. Now, again, the verticals, same as the vertical of the can, the verticals of the lettering would also go straight up and down. However, the horizontal lines in the lettering, they're going to be the ones that go around the ellipse. So let's try not to get my N upside down like I normally do. Oh, I have done, I think. And you can see the way that you can actually have the text disappearing around the ellipse, making it more realistic. Okay, so we've got one more thing to look at on the computer. Okay, so I mentioned there that the bottom ellipse of the glass here that we just drew was slightly deeper, so I'm going to just explain that a little bit. So if we have a figure, and the figure is looking at glass, and the glass is at a distance like this, what we've got to think about is the angle at which the figure is viewing the glass. So that there, this here is below eye level by a certain amount, and this here is further below eye level. But the difference between the two ellipses differs by this very small amount. Essentially this angle here is quite important. So because this angle is incredibly small, the difference between the top ellipse and the bottom ellipse of the glass would be fairly insignificant. If we were to move the glass closer and then look at how that is viewed, the top of the glass and the bottom of the glass, there is a larger angle between them. There's a larger distance, essentially, because it's now, well, there's not a larger distance, but because it's closer, the angle at which it's being viewed is a little bit different. Now remember that the axis, the major axis going across the top doesn't change. It's always the width of the glass, but the minor axis, which is how deep the ellipse is dependent on the eye level, or where it is in relationship to eye level, as we've explained before. So if we take these away and we move the glass so that it is closer, and then we look at the lines, what we've got here is on this particular glass, because it is now very close, the top ellipse here is only just below eye level. There's eye level over there. So only just below. This one here, however, is almost, it's about 40 degrees further down, and therefore what you end up with is the top ellipse is very, very narrow, and the minor axis, which is across the ellipse, is tiny, whereas the bottom ellipse, the minor axis, is very large. So what this tells us is, when you view your cylindrical object, and if you think carefully enough about these, how deep the ellipse is, it can actually tell the viewer your exact distance from the object that you're drawing. So just by drawing one cylindrical object, you can create a very believable depth in your drawing. Okay folks, I've got one very quick tip for you, for anyone who's drawing something that has rounded edges. So let's say a bottle. So let's say we're going to start off by saying the bottle's going to be that wide. We've got our straight edges. I'm going to draw these first. We can even start off by saying, hopefully this is just hard enough that you can see, hopefully. Let's say the shoulders of the bottle are going to start there, so that's the top part. It's quite often also a useful idea to start off with a centre line, just to keep you right. So let's say the neck of the bottle is going to be from there to there, right? So that is us got our the kind of very straight cylindrical parts. However, we have the shoulders of the bottle, and the shoulders of the bottle might look a particular way. Now, your hand will naturally curve in this direction, okay? It does not naturally curve inwards, but it naturally curves outwards just because of the way your hand's constructed. So creating a kind of an outer rounded shape like this is quite easy. However, when you go to do this side here, it's always very hard to match that up. So it's just a very simple tip is turn your paper upside down so that the curve is also being done with the same outer shape. You can also, this little curve in here again, whilst we're upside down, we can put that in. And again, when we turn it around this way, we can put it in like so. What that will allow you to do is make two curves that are much more similar and therefore make your bottle a little bit more believable. Okay, that took me years before I figured out, and it certainly makes life an awful lot easier. Okay, so before we set the task, let's just recap exactly what it is you have to do. First of all, you're being asked to draw a cylindrical object, something like a bottle, a can of soup, a cup, and in doing so, I want to see ellipses. Now, let's think about what we've covered so far. In an ellipse, first of all, it's the roundedness of the shape, no corners. So you might want to try standing up and swinging your arm from the shoulder in order to get that nice ellipse. Okay, second of all, you need to consider the distance you are to your object in terms of the ellipse at the top and the ellipse at the bottom. How different will they be? As you can see, this cup is far away, so the ellipse at the top and the bottom look quite similar, but as I bring it closer to the camera, watch what happens. The top ellipse, well, it's a straight line, and the bottom starts to get curved. If we put that above our eye level, the ellipse actually goes the other way, it curves upwards. So we have to consider how far away your cup is in terms of having a difference between the two ellipses. When you're putting your ellipses in, before you actually start to draw them, put a straight line going across so that you can see the two far points of the major axis going across. Put your 2 points above and below the major axis to show the minor axis so that your ellipse stays nice and symmetrical, which it always should be. Okay, so I will look forward to seeing all your efforts. Thank you.